Hello, everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a deeply important and increasingly tense topic that Michael Clarke recently explored during a Q&A session: why NATO is getting more concerned, more coordinated, and more alarmed about the direction global security is heading in. Clarke, known for his clear-eyed assessments and decades of experience in defense analysis, breaks down the current geopolitical climate in a way that's accessible but sobering. In this video script, we're going to unpack the key arguments he makes, explore the broader context behind NATO's growing worries, and look at how shifting alliances, military modernization, and escalating regional conflicts all feed into this moment of global uncertainty. We'll also reflect on what it means for ordinary people watching these developments unfold, and why experts believe we're entering one of the most unpredictable periods in decades. Clarke begins by addressing a question many people ask: why does NATO seem more active now than at any time since the end of the Cold War? His answer is straightforward: because the world is becoming less stable, and the threats facing the alliance are no longer hypothetical. Over the past decade, NATO has watched rival powers expand their military reach, test the boundaries of international law, and push aggressive strategies designed to alter the global balance. Clarke emphasizes that NATO is no longer dealing with simple deterrence. It's dealing with live crises that require immediate attention. He points out that the alliance now confronts simultaneous challenges, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific, and that the complexity of these challenges forces NATO to reassess how prepared it truly is. One of the central points Clarke makes is that NATO faces a new form of geopolitical competition involving hybrid warfare, digital sabotage, advanced missile systems, and proxy conflicts. He explains that traditional warfare has evolved dramatically. Instead of large armies massing on borders, modern conflicts are fought through misinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, targeted political disruptions, paramilitary groups, and sudden strategic strikes. This creates an environment where threats emerge quietly, often without clear warning. Clarke warns that this ambiguity is what makes NATO nervous. When adversaries blur the line between peace and conflict, it becomes difficult for the alliance to determine when to intervene, how to respond, and what escalation might look like. Clarke also highlights that Russia remains at the center of many NATO discussions. He doesn't frame this as ideological rivalry, but as a practical assessment of Russian strategy. Moscow's approach, he argues, is rooted in keeping Western institutions uncertain. From military buildups along NATO borders to the use of long-range systems and the expansion of operations in regions like the Arctic and the Black Sea, Russia's actions are deliberately unpredictable. Clarke notes that NATO sees these moves not as isolated incidents, but as part of a long-term pattern. He reiterates that NATO's worry is not that Russia will attack the alliance directly, but that its willingness to take risks elsewhere could spark a crisis that drags NATO into a wider confrontation, something no nation wants, but something that becomes more plausible as tensions rise. Another major concern Clarke touches on is China's growing role in global military and technological competition. Although China is not an immediate military threat to NATO territories, Clarke explains that NATO is increasingly focused on Beijing's impact on the international system. China's rapid naval expansion, cyber capabilities, and strategic partnerships are reshaping global power dynamics. Clarke says NATO countries worry that China's influence could embolden other states to challenge the existing security structure, especially when combined with its deepening relationship with Russia. This partnership, based on shared interests rather than ideology, represents a significant strategic shift. Together, These two powers create a multipolar challenge that NATO has not faced in decades. Clarke also spends time explaining that NATO's internal issues contribute to its unease. Not all member states agree on how to approach emerging threats or how much they should invest in defense. Clarke notes that while many countries have pledged to increase military spending, some still lag behind. This creates vulnerabilities. If part of the alliance is underprepared, the whole alliance becomes exposed. Clarke stresses that NATO depends on unity, coordination, and readiness. Without these elements, the alliance's deterrence loses credibility. And credibility, he argues, is everything in global security. During the Q&A, Clarke is asked whether NATO is preparing for war. He clarifies that NATO does not want war and is not expecting one. Instead, it is preparing to prevent one. The alliance is boosting readiness, strengthening eastern defenses, improving military mobility across Europe, increasing intelligence sharing, and enhancing cyber defenses. These measures are not about aggression, they are about stability. Clarke explains that failing to prepare creates opportunities for miscalculation. And it is miscalculation that historically leads to conflicts no one originally intended. Clarke also addresses the conflict zones that directly feed into NATO's concerns. The ongoing war in Eastern Europe remains the most immediate example. He explains that the war has exposed the limits of European defense capability and demonstrated how quickly a regional conflict can escalate into a global crisis. The humanitarian disaster, economic disruption, and energy shocks all ripple across borders. Clarke warns that if the war drags on or expands, NATO must ensure it is not caught off guard. He suggests that the future of the conflict will have long-term implications for global security and NATO's strategic posture. In the Middle East, Clarke explains that NATO faces another set of problems. Instability, proxy wars, and rising tensions between major regional powers create an environment where flashpoints can erupt unpredictably. Clarke notes that NATO cannot afford to ignore the region, especially when energy routes, migration pressures, and terrorism threats intersect with global alliances. He argues that NATO must navigate these challenges carefully, avoiding unnecessary escalation while still protecting its interests. A particularly important part of Clarke's Q&A deals with emerging technologies. He highlights how advancements in drones, hypersonic missiles, artificial intelligence, and electronic warfare are transforming military strategy. These technologies reduce reaction times, complicate defense planning, and increase the risk of rapid escalation. Clarke warns that if adversaries believe they can win a quick, decisive advantage using these tools, they may be tempted to act more aggressively. NATO's challenge is to keep pace, maintain deterrence, and ensure that its defenses are adaptive enough to respond to evolving threats. Clarke also acknowledges that public opinion plays a crucial role. He emphasizes that people need to understand why governments invest in defense, why alliances matter, and why international cooperation is essential. Without public support, NATO's ability to act becomes restricted. Clarke argues that transparency and communication are vital, especially in an era where misinformation spreads quickly. He calls on leaders to be honest about risks, clear about strategy, and realistic about what the future holds. Near the end of the session, Clarke is asked whether he believes a major conflict is likely. His answer is cautious but firm. Conflict is not inevitable, but the risk is higher now than at any point in the last 30 years. He stresses that geopolitical competition does not automatically lead to war, but history shows that rising powers, defensive alliances, and unstable regions create dangerous conditions. Clarke believes that diplomacy, military readiness, and strategic clarity are the tools that will determine whether the world navigates this period safely. Clarke concludes by reminding audiences that NATO's concerns are not about fear, but responsibility. The alliance exists to maintain peace, stability, and international order. Its increasing vigilance reflects the realities of a world undergoing rapid change. Clarke encourages viewers to stay informed, understand the complexities at play, and recognize that security is not something to take for granted. This moment in history is one of significant uncertainty. Clarke's analysis makes it clear that the world is entering a period where alliances matter more than ever, where small conflicts can have global consequences, and where preparation is essential to avoid disaster. His cue and accession is a reminder that while the future is uncertain, informed decision making, unity, and strategic awareness remain our best tools for preserving peace in a rapidly changing world.